she was only 8 years old. The pressure of fame pushed her into such an extreme dieting regimen that her body nearly collapsed. A quiet, one-sided love for David Cassidy ended in heartbreak. One of their most private moments was exposed in the tabloids. In the end, Susan quietly walked away from Hollywood. She turned down reunion offers, stepped away from the public eye, and refused to return to the past that had once made her famous. Why did Susan Dey leave Hollywood, a world millions would have given anything to enter? What had really been hidden behind that familiar smile? And what quiet tragedies finally pushed her to leave it all behind? This is the untold story of the life Susan Dey kept hidden behind the curtain. Susan Dey was born on December 10, 1952, in Illinois, into a middle-class family. Her father was a newspaper editor, while her mother worked as a nurse. There was nothing to suggest that Susan would one day become one of the most recognizable young women in America. But that peace did not last. When Susan was only 8 years old, her mother suddenly died. Susan did not rebel or lash out. She became quieter, more withdrawn, and learned to keep much of what she felt to herself. She was still a child, but the loss forced her to grow up sooner than she should have. Her father later remarried a woman named Gail. Gail noticed Susan's striking features, expressive eyes, and natural innocence. Susan herself did not seem to see anything special. She was shy, unsure of herself, and hardly seemed like someone eager to be noticed. Then, in 1968, when Susan was 15, Gail took several photographs of her and sent them to a modeling agency in New York. There was no Hollywood background, no acting experience, and no carefully planned career. Just a few photographs. But they were enough. Modeling work soon followed, and Gail continued encouraging Susan toward the spotlight. It was a world that would eventually carry her to the height of fame, while also leading her into some of the deepest emotional pain of her life. By 15, Susan was already working as a model. Her soft features, expressive eyes, and quiet innocence helped her stand out, and before long, her photographs were appearing in magazines. For the first time, the shy girl who had never expected much attention was beginning to receive it. Then came 1970. One of Susan's modeling photographs caught the attention of producers at ABC, and she was called in for the Partridge Family. She had no formal acting training and had never worked in film or television. Yet after only a few auditions, she won the role of Laurie Partridge, the eldest daughter in the musical sitcom. Suddenly, Susan had to learn everything while the cameras were already rolling. She acted, appeared at the keyboard, sang with the family, hit her marks, and tried to keep pace with a network television schedule. There was little time to prepare. America was already watching. The Partridge Family premiered in the fall of 1970 and quickly became a cultural phenomenon. The show was not only a television hit, its music was climbing the charts as well. I Think I Love You went all the way to #1, and the faces of the cast seemed to be everywhere. Susan appeared on magazine covers, posters, school notebooks, and bedroom walls across America. Fan letters poured into the studio week after week. Within a matter of months, she had become one of the most recognizable teenage faces in the country. Years later, Susan described what fame at that age had felt like. You feel like an adult, but you are not an adult, and society does not treat you as an adult. That was the part audiences could not see. Laurie Partridge looked calm, beautiful, and completely at ease on television. Behind the cameras, Susan was still a teenager, trying to keep up with a life that had become much bigger than she was ready for. And the bigger that fame became, the more pressure there was to remain the perfect young woman America had fallen in love with. But preserving that perfect image began to cost Susan her health. As the Partridge Family became more successful, producers kept pressuring her to stay as thin as possible, reflecting the harsh beauty standards television placed on young women at the time. Susan began eating less and less. At times, she lived on little more than carrots and celery. Her weight fell to around 90 pounds, and her arms became painfully thin. Years later, she explained part of what had been happening. One of the choices you do have is what you eat and what you don't eat. Yet when the cameras started rolling, Susan still smiled as if nothing were wrong. With no professional musical background, Susan had to learn acting, harmonizing, and playing the piano while the cameras kept rolling. There was no long period of training and no chance to slow down. She was learning as she worked, even as her health continued to deteriorate. The Partridge Family ran for 4 seasons. For Susan, that meant 4 years of trying to keep up with the work while maintaining the same perfect image America expected to see. The songs kept charting. The albums kept selling. Susan kept smiling. But behind that familiar image, her health was paying the price. The brighter the success became, the deeper the cracks inside Susan grew. Even while her health was suffering behind the scenes, Susan was already looking for a way beyond Laurie Partridge. In 1972, she took her first step toward more serious dramatic work. She appeared in the suspense thriller Skyjacked, acting alongside Hollywood veteran Charlton Heston. She played a frightened passenger aboard a hijacked airliner. The film was a box office success, grossing over $10 million. It was her first real step away from the safe world of television comedy, and it showed audiences sitting in theaters that she could handle something far removed from the sitcom format. During that exact same year, she also published Secrets on Boys, Beauty and Popularity. The book provided practical advice on diet, makeup, fashion, and dating for young women, offering a glimpse into her personal routines. It quickly became a nationwide bestseller. Teenage girls across the country did not just want to watch her on television. They wanted to be her. But the greater her fame grew, the darker the shadows behind her success became. In the spring of 1974, the Partridge Family officially ended its 4-year run on the ABC network, completing 96 episodes. For Susan, the ending was far more difficult. Since she was 17 years old, she had lived inside a highly controlled, protective cocoon on the studio lot. For 4 years, her days had been rigorously structured by call sheets. Her words were written for her by a team of writers. Her wardrobe was meticulously selected, and her lighting was perfectly arranged to ensure she always looked flawless. The directors, the producers, and the crew had essentially become her second family. Now, the daily structure that had shaped her life since she was a teenager was suddenly gone. She was 21 years old, standing entirely on her own in Los Angeles. She had to navigate an entertainment industry that still valued her far more for what she had been than for what she was trying to become. Hollywood was not eager to let her move forward into adult roles. She entered the guest star circuit, taking on single-episode roles in established, male-dominated television series like Hawaii Five-0, The Streets of San Francisco, and SWAT. She also secured a prominent part in the 1978 television miniseries adaptation of Louisa May Alcott's classic novel Little Women, playing the role of Josephine March alongside Meredith Baxter, Ann Dusenberry, and Dorothy McGuire. The miniseries was a rating success, but the ghost of Laurie Partridge followed her into every single audition room across Los Angeles. Casting directors would look at her across the table and still see the teenage girl from the Partridge Family. They expected the lighthearted, musical comedy style that had defined her late teens. They still wanted the familiar smile audiences remembered, not the serious dramatic actress Susan was trying to become. In 1977, she hoped to finally break that mold with a starring role in the CBS sitcom Loves Me, Loves Me Not, created by Susan Harris. She played Jane Benson, a young schoolteacher navigating single life in Southern California. She hoped it would prove she could carry a primetime series as an independent adult woman. But the television audience simply did not tune in. Ratings plummeted immediately, and the network canceled the series after only 6 episodes. But that exact same year, a crucial shift occurred. Television producer Renee Valente looked at Susan and saw more than a former teenage idol. Valente cast her in the television movie Mary Jane Harper Cried Last Night. Susan played a young mother suffering a psychological breakdown and physically abusing her own child. Critics responded positively, and for the first time Hollywood had clear evidence that Susan could carry serious dramatic material. But one strong performance could not instantly erase years of ingrained typecasting. Susan kept working through television films and theatrical releases, taking every chance she could to move further away from Laurie Partridge. In 1977, she starred in the romantic drama First Love, acting alongside William Catt. In 1981, she took a supporting role in the science fiction thriller Looker, written and directed by Michael Crichton. She also took on the role of a struggling actress in the 1986 independent comedy drama Echo Park. Nearly a decade of quiet, persistent work would pass before she landed the role that finally changed how Hollywood saw her. The definitive turning point of her adult career arrived in 1986. Susan auditioned for and won the role of Grace Van Owen in the NBC legal drama L.A. Law, created by Stephen Bochco and Terry Louise Fisher. Grace was a sharp, fiercely intelligent deputy district attorney who prosecuted heavy criminal cases in Los Angeles and would eventually rise to become a respected judge on the bench. She moved through packed courtrooms in tailored suits, delivering dense legal dialogue with authority. The series became must-see television on Thursday nights, sparking national conversations about the American legal system. Among that powerful ensemble cast was Susan, completely transformed from the teenage star America remembered. Her performance earned her a Golden Globe Award in 1988 for Best Actress in a Television Series Drama, along with 3 consecutive Emmy Award nominations for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series. More than a decade after Laurie Partridge, Susan had finally established herself as a serious dramatic actress. With that success came a new sense of authority. Susan cared deeply about the integrity of Grace Van Owen as a professional working woman. During the filming of one storyline, she was handed a script where Grace unexpectedly kisses her colleague, Victor Cifuentes, played by Jimmy Smits, in a parking garage. Susan read the scene, walked directly to the writers, and asked, "What is this all about? Is this really part of Grace?" Stephen Bochco explained why the scene made sense for Grace. Susan listened and accepted the explanation. By then, Susan was no longer afraid to question how Grace was being written. She continued to stretch her professional boundaries. She even hosted Saturday Night Live in 1992, giving audiences a rare look at her ability to handle live comedy. But Hollywood remained highly unpredictable. She was cast as the female lead in a new CBS sitcom called Love and War, created by Murphy Brown creator Diane English. She played a sophisticated New York restaurateur named Wally Porter. The show debuted to high ratings, but after completing just one 23-episode season, she was replaced by Annie Potts. The network producers felt she and her male co-star Jay Thomas lacked the necessary on-screen chemistry. Susan did not fight the decision publicly in the press. She simply moved on. She pivoted straight back to the kind of complex, challenging roles that genuinely tested her as an artist. In 1993, she starred in and co-produced the ABC television film Lies and Lullabies, playing a pregnant woman addicted to cocaine. She followed it with darker television films including Bed of Lies, Deadly Love, and Blue River, taking on stories of murder, betrayal, addiction, and broken families. By then, almost nothing remained of the Laurie Partridge image Hollywood had once tried to keep her in. In 2002, she returned to play Grace Van Owen one last time in an L.A. Law reunion television movie. 2 years later, in 2004, following a brief appearance as Dr. Breen on the police and fire drama series Third Watch, she quietly stepped away from acting altogether. There was no grand farewell tour, no tearful retrospective interview with the press. Susan stopped appearing. She repeatedly declined Partridge Family reunions and quietly left Hollywood behind. She simply walked away. She could walk away from Hollywood, but there was one part of her past Susan could never completely leave behind: David Cassidy. They first met when they were still teenagers on the sound stages of the Partridge Family. On the television screen, Susan Day and David Cassidy presented a warm, functional sibling relationship to millions of American households. Viewers believed they shared a beautiful bond that extended beyond the broadcast. But off-camera, Susan soon realized she had fallen deeply in love with David. She loved his humor, his natural confidence, and the undeniable energy he seemed to bring whenever he walked onto the soundstage. But David's life outside the studio was very different from Susan's. He was at the absolute center of a massive teen idol phenomenon. He was playing sold-out stadium concerts and was constantly surrounded by endless adoration and women every single night. Yet Susan remained by his side on the set. She sat and quietly listened as he shared stories about his fleeting romantic encounters with other people. She hid her pain as the man she loved saw her only as an innocent younger sister. Her feelings became obvious enough that Shirley Jones repeatedly warned Susan against getting involved with David. When the television series officially ended in 1974, everything changed. David invited her out. They had dinner. They spent the night together. It was a moment Susan believed would finally bring the two of them together. But the next morning, the reality of their differing perspectives became painfully clear. David realized he simply did not feel the same way about her, and he could not give her what she longed for. To Susan, that night was love. To David, it was guilt. For nearly 2 decades, that single night remained a completely private matter between two former co-stars. But in 1994, David Cassidy published his memoir, Come On, Get Happy. He wrote publicly and in vivid detail about their night together. He used the pages of a book sold nationwide to explain his own lack of romantic interest in her. The woman who had fought for over 10 years to establish herself as a serious private actress was suddenly pulled right back into the tabloid gossip of her teenage years. When the press inevitably asked her about the memoir, her response was brief. She called the public exposure a tremendous, terrible violation. She added that the entire situation was tacky, real tacky, and when a reporter asked how the book had impacted their current dynamic, Susan delivered her final conclusion. There is no relationship. After that day, Susan kept a strict distance from David. She cut off all contact, and his later apologies never repaired the damage. She also continued to actively avoid all Partridge Family reunions. When David Cassidy died in 2017, at the age of 67, Susan made no public statement. She remained completely silent. After David Cassidy, Susan still had to move forward with her own personal life. She eventually found a very different kind of connection with Dale McRaven. David stood in front of screaming crowds and packed stadium audiences. Dale worked behind the camera, writing scripts and building television from the other side of the lens. He had actually written scripts for the Partridge Family, placing him directly in her exact professional world. He clearly understood the entertainment industry she was working in, but he lived firmly on the other side of the camera. For Susan, that difference truly mattered. With Dale, there was no competition for public attention and no teenage idol circus following them everywhere they went. He would later go on to help create massive television comedy hits like Mork and Mindy and the long-running series Perfect Strangers. But during their time together, the relationship simply offered Susan a necessary sense of calm away from the frantic energy of the studio lot. It was a peaceful relationship, but as the Partridge Family reached its absolute peak, Susan's demanding production schedule and rising national fame began pulling them in entirely different directions. They were living at different speeds, and they ultimately parted ways. There were no public arguments or tabloid scandals. They simply let go of each other. The relationship ended quietly. Then came Lenny Herschen. Lenny was a veteran William Morris agent whose clients included Hollywood heavyweights like Clint Eastwood. He understood the entertainment industry entirely from the business side. By the time Susan met him, he had already spent years negotiating contracts and navigating studios from behind a desk, while Susan was still fighting to prove herself in front of the camera. There was a significant difference in their respective stages of life. When they officially married in November of 1976, Susan was just 23 years old, and Lenny was pushing 50. That age gap of approximately 25 years meant they were standing at completely different points in their personal and professional lives. The relationship offered Susan a kind of stability her acting career did not. Their wedding was a quiet, private ceremony, intentionally avoiding the media attention that usually surrounded celebrity marriages at the time. 2 years later, in 1978, they welcomed their daughter, Sarah Day Hershon. Motherhood gave Susan a part of her life that existed completely outside the roles and expectations Hollywood had placed on her. At home, Sarah was not an audience, a television producer, or a casting director. She was simply Susan's daughter. But those exact years also coincided with one of the most uncertain periods of Susan's acting career. She was actively trying to build a serious adult acting portfolio while simultaneously navigating her new life as a wife and a mother. In 1977, the CBS television sitcom Loves Me Not was quickly canceled after only 6 episodes had aired on the network. Later that exact same year, her performance in the television film Mary Jane Harper Cried Last Night showed a darker, much more complex side of her talent. But she was still auditioning constantly, trying to completely escape the Laurie Partridge image. In 1978, the exact same year her daughter was born, she appeared in the television miniseries adaptation of the classic novel Little Women, acting alongside Meredith Baxter and Ann Dusenberry. Susan was a working actress actively fighting for her place in the industry. She was still taking risks on new characters and facing the constant possibility of rejection in casting rooms across Los Angeles. Lenny, on the other hand, was already completely established on the business side of the industry. When Susan was still taking auditions that could change the course of her entire career, Lenny had already reached the stage where his professional identity was firmly established. The age difference was not just a simple number, it placed them at very different moments in life. Over time, their daily lives simply began moving in entirely different directions. By 1981, the marriage was officially over. There was no public scandal and no bitter exchange of words leaked through the press. The divorce was handled quietly and privately. Susan moved forward as a single mother to Sarah. The marriage had ended, but Sarah remained at the absolute center of Susan's life. By 30, Susan was a single mother, still working, still rebuilding, and still without the lasting partnership she had hoped for. A few years later, Susan met Bernard Safransky. By then, she was no longer the teenage star who had once confused attention with security. She was a single mother, still rebuilding her career, and still trying to protect the parts of her life Hollywood had never learned to leave alone. Bernard came from the same industry, but from a very different side of it. He was an experienced television producer who had spent years working behind the camera. They met around 1983 at the home of a mutual friend, at a time when Susan's life was beginning to change again. Sarah was already at the center of her private world, and any lasting relationship now had to make room for both mother and daughter. Bernard did exactly that, becoming part of the family Susan had already built around Sarah. Their relationship developed quietly. There were no screaming fans, no teenage idol frenzy, and no need to turn the romance into a public story. Bernard understood schedules, production pressures, and the demands of television because he had lived inside that world himself. But he did not need Susan to perform for him. Their lives simply began to fit together in a way her earlier relationships had not. And the timing mattered. In 1986, Susan won the role of Grace Van Owen on LA Law, finally securing the adult dramatic breakthrough she had spent years chasing. 2 years later, in 1988, she and Bernard married in a private ceremony at the Bel Air Hotel. Members of the LA Law cast were there, but the wedding itself remained deliberately small and personal. By then, Susan was entering one of the strongest periods of her career. She had moved far beyond Laurie Partridge, and the woman Bernard married was no longer trying to prove that she could survive outside a teenage image. She had already done it. Their partnership soon extended beyond home. Bernard later produced television projects in which Susan starred, including Bed of Lies and Whose Child Is This? The War for Baby Jessica. For the first time, one of Susan's most important personal relationships also became a professional collaboration. They understood the same industry from opposite sides of the camera and learned how to work within it together. But what Susan seemed to value most was what happened away from work. By 1989, she was speaking less about fame and more about wanting quiet time with Sarah and Bernard. After years of living inside schedules, ratings, auditions, headlines, and other people's expectations, ordinary family time had begun to matter more. It was a striking change for someone whose adult life had begun with millions of strangers watching her every week. The relationship lasted, so did Susan's desire for privacy, and as the years passed, the quieter life she had once struggled to find became something she was increasingly willing to protect. In 2004, Susan Dey appeared in 2 episodes of Third Watch. Then the credits stopped. There was no retirement announcement, no farewell interview, and no final press conference explaining why she was done. After more than 3 decades in front of cameras, Susan simply stopped taking roles and stepped out of the machinery that had defined most of her adult life. She did not disappear in the dramatic way Hollywood often imagines. She chose a smaller life. Susan and Bernard Safransky built their private world away from Los Angeles, spending much of their time in upstate New York. There were no weekly appearances, no public campaign to remain visible, and almost no social media presence. The woman whose face had once covered magazines and bedroom walls no longer seemed interested in being seen simply because people remembered her. That boundary extended to the Partridge Family. Over the years, Susan repeatedly declined reunion opportunities, even as other cast members returned to celebrate the show that had made them famous. She did not publicly attack the series or the people connected to it. She simply chose not to go back. After everything that had happened around that period of her life, the refusal itself became part of the story. Hollywood had spent years asking Susan to revisit the girl America remembered. Susan kept choosing the woman she had become instead. But stepping away from acting did not mean she stopped using her name for something that mattered. Susan had served on the board of the UCLA Rape Treatment Center, supporting work for survivors of sexual assault. She also joined her LA Law co-star Corbin Burnson in work connected to campus rape, a documentary project focused on sexual violence and prevention. In interviews around that work, Susan spoke about how young men could be shaped by ignorance, peer pressure, and a lack of education about consent. It was a very different use of the public voice that fame had once forced upon her. This time, she was choosing what that voice was for. That choice adds another layer to the way Susan Day should be remembered. America first knew her as Laurie Partridge, the smiling teenage daughter in a musical family that seemed almost impossibly wholesome. More than a decade later, she returned as Grace Van Owen, an intelligent prosecutor and judge who moved through courtrooms with authority and earned Susan a Golden Globe and 3 Emmy nominations. Laurie made her famous. Grace proved she could become something else. And then Susan made one more transformation that was far less visible. She became someone who no longer needed Hollywood to confirm that her life still had value. By the time she stepped away, she had already lived through the loss of her mother, the pressure to remain painfully thin, the collapse of young love, 2 very different marriages, years of typecasting, professional rejection, and the public exposure of a private relationship she had wanted to keep buried. She had also built a second career after Laurie, raised a daughter, found a marriage that lasted, and used her public standing to support people whose stories were far more